Debugging.tv. My name is Margaret. I'll be your broadcast engineer for today. We're here to talk about the wonderful and amazing FileMaker platform. We're big on having a community here and giving a lot of free content to anyone who comes up and shows up and watches, honestly. I'm here at the wonderful senior engineer Calvin to talk about the while function. But before we get into that, let's say hello to people. Hello, Ken, Foxy, Goodidi, Jesse, Ken. Oh, no, I said Ken, Larry, Art. Butterflies and Bugs, Code to Go on my Twitch chat. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you here. Good to see you here. Real quick, if you'd like to support the channel, we always appreciate it. We do this 5 days a week at 1 p.m. PST on 3 different platforms, 3 of them. So we do Discord, YouTube, and Twitch. But if you're like, man, this isn't really working out for me, I don't really like this sort of thing. I mean, the live streams are cool and the free content's cool and all that jazz, but we take questions live. We do occasionally get sidetracked from the primary topic. It is an hour long, and even the editing is kind of like mostly like cleaning up and not so much chunking things down to smaller. If I'd like more focused animated content, this is for you. They have from training annual subscription bundles. Buying one of these supports the channel, of course, but also gives you access to a crap ton of video content. Seriously, there is a lot here. 100 plus hours. Definitely more than 100 hours. I did the math on it once, I'm forgetting right now, but it is a lot. There are 3 options. We have the basic, which has most of the basic video options, FM Training Plus, which has a calendar kit and all the video courses. This does the 3 courses. We have a lot of like smaller courses, also like certification training, UI stuff. This is the 3 primary courses, which I believe is Go, Server, and Pro. This has all of our little sub courses, and then this also comes with a version of FileMaker. So if you're like, I need a version of FileMaker along with all of my courses and a special copy of FMSP, which is our free, we have that unlocked free version, but there is an enhanced version that has a lot of widgets pre-installed, so you don't have to do it yourself. Cool. With that being said, I think we're good. Calvin, what are we doing today?
So we're looking at the while function, and this is going to be an introduction to the while function. We're going to look at how we can use it. We're going to look at how it works, and then we're going to look at a couple demos for what you might be able to use it for. I use it pretty frequently, but most of the demos that I have, and I'm going to show you 2 different demos that I have that are pretty generic, but lots of times I'm using it, it's something very specific and not really applicable to share with everybody else. If anybody else has a calculation they've written with the while function that's kind of generic and wants to share that with everybody else, you can just drop that in Discord or in the chat, and Margaret will put it in Discord. I'd love to see some other things you're working on. So this is an introduction. So if you've used while, maybe you'll catch something new. But if you haven't, this is going to be a great introduction. So let's look at this. So let's look, what is while? While repeats logic while the condition is true, then it returns the result. So here, if we look at our function, we have while, and then we set initial variables. It could be 1 or more. Then we have a condition, and as long as this is true, it repeats the logic. And then once the condition is false, it gives us a result. And the cool thing about this is the logic, you can keep referring to the initial variables and increment it. And so so you can get these really great results. What did we use before while? Before while, we used recursive functions. That'd be a custom function that calls itself. Recursive custom functions. And those were, while is a little bit much to wrap your head around, and recursive functions were even a little more difficult to wrap your head around. In fact, when they had when you took the what is it called? The certification test, and they tested you on recursive custom functions, one of the words that you were supposed to figure out how it was spelled or how it worked was foobar. So I'm guessing that they were really frustrated with it themselves. So let's look at while. And you'll notice that while is kind of, it's like a let statement, and then there's a little bit more tacked on. So if we jump back to let, which we looked at last week, we have our initial variables, and then we have a calculation. And so here on while, we have our initial variables and then a result, which you could think of as that initial calculation. But then in the middle, we have this condition and logic that allow us to repeat those calculations over and over again. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example. So this is my first demo, and we're just going to look at this. I'm going to say specify. And this is just showing us what this can do. So I'm going to press play, and we'll see our result is 100. So every time I use the while function, I have a counter and a limit. The counter is what increments each time, and each time the logic is run. And the limit is the limit to how many times it's going to run. One thing that's helpful for me when I start working on a while is I put the entire, like the format of the calculation here at the bottom so I can see what the different parts of it are. And then I might label everything in here. So it's just easier for me to see what's going on and recognize the different areas. So, oops. So here we have our initial variables, the counter and the limit. Then we have our condition. And then we have here is our logic. And then finally, we have our result. And sometimes I actually will call the result. So that helps us to figure out what's going on. Now you'll notice here, I've got two variables that I'm using. There's only one part of the condition. The condition must be Boolean. And then the logic, we can have multiple. Now here I only have one. Let's add another. I'm just going to call this result. And it's going to reference the counter. Now, who thinks this is going to work? Does anyone want to give a guess if this will work or not? I will give you a hint. It won't work. So let's try it and see what happens. Oh, it did. So the reason is that I'm referencing the result here. If the result referenced itself, I would have to call it in the initial variables. So it worked. Can you have an or in a condition? Yes, you can. So in the condition, we can say, I would put them in parentheses, you can say or one or something like that, or next thing. And then if either of them are true, then it will go through as being true. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, Ruben says cool. That does indeed answer his question.
Yeah, so it just has to be Boolean. So anything that you would write as a Boolean calculation would work there. So do we have any other questions about just just this basic setup? I made this really basic so that we could see how it works.
Yeah, so this is a really silly question because I know you said the condition has to be Boolean, but I don't quite understand the difference between the condition and logic. So
yeah, so
what is the condition doing and what is the logic doing? Does that make
yeah,
sense
so
as a question?
right. So another way to think about the while is, and I kind of wish they had called it a loop, because we have an if script step and we have an if function. But the while is kind of like a loop or an else if. So so the loop, or not an else if, but a loop. So here, think of this as a loop. We have our initial variables and then our condition here. So if this is true, run the logic.
Got
If
it.
this is not true, give me the result.
Okay,
So
that makes
as
a lot more
long as the
sense.
limit is under 5, as long as the counter is under 5, it's going to increment the counter. Once the counter hits 5, it's going to give us the result or here. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're saying we're looping through this logic, and the condition is what's deciding whether we loop again or we go to the result. Good question. Any other questions?
Yes. Result isn't part of the commented out result, so this isn't any different than the original? Question mark.
So the difference here is that, so I can disable that. It's going to be the same either way, because the result is pointing to the counter. But if I put here result plus 1, then it's going to give me an error because it doesn't know what result is because we didn't put it in the initial variable. So it says field is missing. Now, if we copy this, I'm just going to put this I'm using a plugin to look at this. But let's go ahead and just put this in the data viewer so we can see it a little better. See the error message. I'll say, okay, save this, and let's go to the data viewer and add a new one. And I'll say evaluate. Now it's going to say specified field cannot be found, which is the result. Now, if I put result up here, equals, I'm just going to make it empty. It doesn't have to equal anything, but as long as it knows where it's starting out, I can reference it later. But because I wasn't referencing it directly, I was just saying referencing the same thing as the counter, it didn't matter. So here I can disable it. But initially, so I would recommend putting all of your variables, whether they have to be or not, in the initial variables. Then you can kind of see what you're working with, and it will be easier to figure things out. When you're running, it takes a little bit of debugging. One thing about this that's different than a scripted loop is that you can't really walk through each loop in the and check your logic. It's just run it right away. Any other questions before we look at the next part of the demo?
Yes. If the condition is the word false without brackets, will it return 0 or 1 as the result?
If the condition is false without brackets?
Yes.
So yeah, false is false is read as a 0. So if we go to, I'm going to say monitor and create a new one, and I'm just going to put in here false and say evaluate, it gives me a 0. If I put it in brackets, then it's still 0. So I think sometimes I'll put brackets in here because sometimes it gets confused and it's not sure if it's reading like this. I think in this case it wouldn't, but and that way I put too many brackets in. Let's try that. So here, it might read it like this if you don't put in brackets. I put in extra brackets sometimes just to make sure it's reading it the way I want it to.
Basically, he's rephrasing the question. Is the logic run the first time no matter what?
Oh, good question. Okay. So let's try this. Let's put the limit is 0. And we're going to put we're getting the result. And so the counter is never going to be less than 0. So let's see what we're going to have. Say evaluate, and it's empty. So because the condition was never true, we never got the result. It never ran the logic. That was a good question. I had an assumption, but I hadn't tried it out before. So did everyone follow that? So the question was, is the logic run no matter what? Whether the first time no matter what? And the answer is no, it's not run the first time no matter what. If the condition is false the first time, we never get an answer. So in this case, the result isn't set held down here. If we change this to give us the counter instead of the result, we'll get a 0. Let's see if that's true. Yeah, we'll get a 0 because we initially set it up here. But because the result is never set till the logic, then it never happens because the condition is never true.
Got it. So it'll never read logic since the condition is never true. Okay, I see.
And that's just because I set the limit down really low. Now, if I set it to 1, it's going to run the logic once.
False on the while condition. This is someone just saying this in Twitch chat,
Mhm.
false on the while condition will mean that the function runs until it hits the calculation repetition limit. Default 50,000. Huh.
Yes, so that's the next thing we're going to look at. Do you have any questions before we look at that?
I don't see any, though. If you have one, people, just feel free to
Okay.
toss it out there
Yeah,
and
and
we'll get to it.
we can always loop back to
Hmm.
or while back to this this and this conversation on this is still going. So let's go and look at our first demo. So that was our first demo, and that was just kind of to show us how the while works. Now here is our second demo. And I'm going to specify this, and we're going to put our limit. What do they say? 50,000? Let's try it.
50,000? Yep.
Yeah, it was 50,000. So now this time I limited my counter to 50,000. That's a lot of repetitions. So what's going to happen when I go to 50,001? So let me go ahead and copy this. And when you're testing things, this is what you're going to run into. So what happens? 50,000, it worked. Let's change it to something else. 50,001. What's going to happen? It gives me an error. Sorry, there is not enough memory to complete this operation. So sometimes you'll write a loop that is, or a while that has a loop that's infinite. And instead of crashing your computer, FileMaker just says, oh, you hit the limit of 50,000. And we're going to give you this error message. Sorry, there's not enough memory to complete this operation. That's great. But what if you have something that you need to, where you need more than 50,000 repetitions or recursions? You can set the recursion. So if we jump back over to my demo file, where was that? I'm going to say monitor here. Jump back over here. So what is set recursion? So set recursion sets the maximum number of iterations for recursion and loops within an expression. Set recursion, and then there's our expression and the maximum iterations. So in this case, what we'll do, now we got a question mark because it's reaching the limit. So let's go ahead and if we remember 50,000, evaluate, 50,000 works, 50,000. 0.5, we're just going to do half of,
You did 5,000. So
5,000. I was like, how did that work? 50,001, we're going to do that. Sorry, not enough space. So how can we fix this? Let's say set recursion. So here's our expression. And here is our maximum iterations. And we're going to put this at 50,001. Is that right? That's it. And see what happens. Now I say evaluate. Oh, it works. What happens when I go 50,002? Same problem. Not enough memory to complete this operation, and it breaks again. What if I set my recursion limit to 100,000? There we go. Evaluate. It works again. And I can boost this up to 100,000. Evaluate. And it works. 100,001, once again, it breaks. So the set recursion allows you to increase that recursion limit from 50,000, which is the standard, to any number you specify.
what
Thanks for
happens if
bringing
you
that up.
do a decimal out of curiosity? Does it do half a loop? Like
No, it's not. It's just going to
give
see
you
that, put the limit on. It's going to see that it's because my increments are by whole numbers. If I did 0.5, then it would break because it's doing 2 loops for every number. So let's change this to my recursion limit to 300,000. Evaluate. This time it worked because we're going by 0.5. If I remove the 0.5, evaluate. Probably not enough space to. There we go. So this time it worked. So but that's because we're moving by whole numbers. I would recommend using whole numbers. You use fraction or decimals, that's going to be a little confusing for your counter. Any other questions?
This speed amazes me. Did it really just loop 100,000 times in 1 millisecond?
It did, yes. So this is a local file, and we're just counting. We're just counting. We're not really there's the only thing we're doing is saying 1 plus 1, 1 plus 2, 1 plus 3, 1 plus 4, 1 plus 5, 100,000 times. So it's not doing any like hard calculations there. It's like a calculator. It's really doing something pretty easy for a computer. And so it is doing that. You can write a while calculation, especially if it's hosted. This is going to run fast. This particular calculation is going to run fast as a hosted calculation as well. But if you start analyzing data, 100,000 lines of data, it's going to slow down a little bit, and it could spin for a little bit. I don't have a demo to show that, but it can slow down depending on what you're doing in the calculation. Good question. Any other questions?
Not that I can see. You're good to go.
Okay, so let's go to our, so this is kind of the two parts of it. So I wanted to show the structure, how we always have we've got the initial variable, the condition, the logic, and the result, how I like to label these, and how we need to have a counter and a limit. So I wanted to get a demo of something that's practical for how this can be used. So maybe you want to list a bunch of values. So one of the instances that I use, so I think I brought this up at the beginning. Before we had the while function, we had to use recursive functions, recursive custom functions. So here is one recursive custom function called date range. So we've got a start date, an end date, and a range limit. So that is our custom function. And you'll notice that this is just a case statement. We've got some options here, but at the end of the case statement, it references itself, date range and date range. So this the only way you would be able to use this is as a custom function. And but I've used this one quite a bit. So I thought we could rewrite this one as a while function instead of a date function. So I'm going to say, let's do a date range from the second. Let me go ahead and just remove that so you can see what's going on. Oh, let's add our calculation field. So just to show you what's going on here, I've got the date range field, and go to browse mode. It says, please fill in both fields. And so we just have two dates, and then it's using the old date range calculation to start and end. And we have a limit of 100,000. Say okay. And so let's go ahead and put in from the first of the month to today. And here's the result. You can see that increments by 1 from the current date all the way to the 21st, which is today. So, and that is using the custom function, manage custom functions, that we just looked at there, which is kind of the old way of doing this. So what would the new way look like? So here is my third demo here. So we've got and we've got to make some changes here. Let's change our start date to the start. Cancel. What did I just change here? Oh, let's try this. So we'll put in the start. We'll put in the end. We'll put our limit to 100,000. Now you'll notice here I set the date as nothing now, but I need to set the variable of the date because the date is going to be referenced later down here. And I have date list, the same thing. We're referencing the date list down here. Even though I set them so they're empty, so we know where they were starting at. I have my counter and my limit, and I just use limit to reference my range limit. And I'll say I press play there, and we got our same result. 1 through the 21st. So let's go ahead and copy this. So just to walk through this real quick, here's our inputs, the start and end dates, our limit, 100,000. And then we're setting these variables. And then we have our condition here. If the date, which is what we're incrementing to, is less than end date, then run this. Otherwise, give us the date list. So, and I'm just using this one here because we don't need that actually. I was just using it so I could rearrange these lines because I wasn't, when I was testing it, I didn't have them in the right order. Or I was moving them around to figure out the right order. So we have the date, which is whatever date we're selecting, is the start date plus the counter. So it's going to start with the first date and then add 1, set the next date. So the first one was our start date down here, the first. And we added 1, the second, then we added 2, the third. And that kept looping. And we put that in a list. So we listed the date list, whatever date we're adding to the list, plus the latest date at the end. Now we could change this around. What would happen if we put the new date in the top of the list? You'd see that the order reversed. So now we're going 21, 20, 19, 18, 17. I'd rather it be in sequential from the most recent date. So let's go back. We'll put it there and run. And then we're advancing the counter. Now, what if we don't advance the counter? Does anyone want to guess what's going to happen if we don't advance the counter?
Will it not be able to find the range at all?
Yeah, so it runs out of memory because we're not telling it when to stop.
Oh, okay.
So it's going 50,000 times and saying, well, and of the 50 at the end, it's telling us we went too far. And then our result is the date list, the list of all 21 dates that I wanted to give. So let's go ahead and put this into a custom function. Any questions about that before we jump over to the custom functions?
Why did you set the range list to 100K?
Because that's what was over here in this field, but it's actually not referencing the range limit, which is interesting here. So if we want to reference this range limit, thanks for pointing that out. I'm going to say, because we're not referencing it anywhere else, I'm just going to remove it. I'm going to say set recursion. And I'm going to put my max iterations down here. And this will be our custom function. There we go. We don't need the expression is the while function. So there we go. So let's put this into a custom function and we'll see how that translates. Any other questions before we do that though?
Nope. Though, do you want to swap out the max iterations word with 100?
Yeah, good question. So for the demo, I was doing that, and for the custom function, I won't. So let's go ahead and see how we're going to do that. And I don't think it will actually let me save this because of that. So I'm going to just say okay. And let's go over here and we'll say manage custom functions. A lot of times whiles I've spent hours on just one while function trying to set something up, get it to work right. So often you stick these in custom functions so it's easy to reference later. So I'm going to say, I'm going to want this to follow the same setup as this one here, as the one that I was previously using. So I'm going to call this one start date. Oh, I'm sorry, this was date range. Date range. I'm going to say start date, add that one. And now here, instead of referencing the field, I'm going to put in the start date. And then we can put in end date. And then here as well, we'll put in, oops, end date. And then we'll put in the range limit. Finally, so the reason I'm putting it is the same is just so that it looks, if people have used the function before, it will work the same. Now, the one thing I'm not doing here is giving the little notes saying, oh, please fill in both fields. I don't really want to do that. I'm just assuming it's going to work. So let's go ahead and save. But you'll notice I'm not referencing those fields. I'm referencing the variables here. And my range limit, I'm not hard coding it to 100,000. I'm letting the person decide what they want to do. And so I'll save that. And let's go ahead and duplicate this. I'm going to call this one date range. Usually I wouldn't have a field called this. I'm just using the field to show how it works. So here, date range, start, and we're giving the 100,000 limit. Say okay. And so here, let's go ahead and put the new one on. This one a little narrower. Pull it over here. Say date range, go to browse mode, and you'll see they're the same. We're getting the same thing. Now, if I change something here, it says please fill in both fields. This one just doesn't give me a result, which is what I would rather have. But you see it's accomplishing the same thing using a slightly different method, which I think the while was only introduced in FileMaker 18, so I think it's easier to work with. But before FileMaker 18, we had to use these recursive functions. Do we have any questions about that?
Do you still get the out of memory error when using the custom function?
Oh, that's a good question. So let's see what happens. So what I'm going to do here, say date range, old, and I'm going to set the date as date, let's just say the beginning of time, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the end is, actually, let's do a let for this. How about that? Let. And it'll be easier to read. See what's going on here. So start is beginning of time. And end is the date is the start plus, I'm going to start with 50,000. And see what we get. Start, end, and let's give it a limit. Range limit equals, is that, oh, I think I did 500,000, or I did 5 million, I guess. Okay, so 50,000. So here, what do we want to take bets on what we think is going to happen? Anyone have a guess?
I assume I don't know, it'll stop because there's no set, what was it? Date range has exceeded the limit of 50,000 years.
50,000 years. Okay, so let's look and see. Of 50,000 years. Well, it didn't exceed 50,000 years. It's exceeded 50,000 days, right? So let's look at that custom function and see. Oh, did I use the old one or the new one? Yeah, that's the old one. Let's go File, Manage, Custom Functions. We'll look at this old one. Okay, so date range has exceeded the limit of date range years. So that's saying, oh, so here's the range, how it's putting this range limit in there. This is like a self-imposed limit. I'm trying to break FileMaker here. Let me just disable this and see what happens.
Ah.
Okay, so we'll try it again, evaluate. It just gives me a question mark. So let me try this. We'll say set recursion. Actually, let's do, if we do 49, 49, or range limit is 50. It doesn't matter what the range limit is. So let's say 43. Let's see if that works. Still didn't work. If we
Still mad.
change the recursion, will this work? So I'm going to change the recursion to just something really high. Evaluate. It still didn't work. So I'm not going to mess around too much more with this, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't give you that loop running out of memory error. It just gives you a question mark. Now in the other one though, and I'm going to, oops, let's put in today for yesterday. Let's go ahead and just disable this for now. I don't want it thinking about this too much. So let's do another one and we'll say, so let's copy the same let statement. Cancel. And here, I'm going to remove the set recursion and I'm going to use the date range new. Or the new date, the new one we created. It still gives me a question mark. So, which is interesting.
What's it not liking?
Yeah, I don't know. The evaluate. It's not giving me an error though, saying that I've gone too far though. Or maybe it doesn't recognize this as a year.
Gregorian calendar starts at 0001. So maybe
Let's
try
try that.
that
1, 2, 3.
instead.
There's
Ah,
our problem right there.
thank you, NJ. Or you could also, someone else says you could also put it at straight up 0. That might have the same effect, but I don't know if it will.
I put it at 0 and that was why it wasn't working. Okay, now
Got it.
you'll see it's spinning here. I might have crashed FileMaker this time. So we're gonna go, what is that, 10 million? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, just 1 million.
That's just a million. But that might be too much for the poor let function.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, it's the while running in the
Well, it's the custom function, right? That's causing us. This is not the custom. This is the custom function, not while, right? So.
well, it's while running within a custom function, so it's still a custom function.
Oh.
So it's still the while function, but it's running within the custom function.
Got it. Oh, okay. I misunderstood. I thought you were using the old custom function for some reason.
I switched to the new one to see if we could get it to work.
So I wish sometimes there was a timer you could see, because it looks like FileMaker's given up on life from this point of view.
Well, no, it's still
No, it's
working.
not crashed.
Well, it says application's not responding. So luckily I've got FileMaker on here more than once, so we can continue to work through this. So before we go to the next demo, do we have any questions?
Yes.
Okay,
okay, that's a pun. It looks like it'll be running a while. Lol.
Yeah.
Puns aside, could you handle adding fields after the date? Example, variable sales per day, or it's the money sign sales per day. I assume he means like a variable, or maybe he just means the money of the money of sales per day.
Yeah, you're saying, can you add like a $ to the result?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or if you could add another field after the date. So like if you wanted to be like, oh, this is how much money we made in this range of time, I guess.
Yeah, you can really do whatever you want with those, with the result. Not every part of the result needs to repeat, or not every part of the result needs to be referencing something that's repeated. I'm about ready to force quit this. But
Ken says sometimes they'll see it resolve with the not responding. It means it might actually be working with it, but
yeah, so not responding means it's working, but I don't know if I want to let it sit there for too long, for as long as it's requiring. But anyway, the any other questions there?
let me see, making sure I'm not missing anything. Welcome, new people, by the way. Hello, Cal. There's someone named Calvin who's come to watch us, except with a K. Welcome. Yeah, I don't see any other questions at the moment. So
Okay, so the next demo that I am going to show is luckily in another file. So let me find that. While we'll let that one think about it a little bit, and we'll open this in the other file.
the wonders of multiple versions of FileMaker.
Yeah. So here we have, so this is something we've talked about before.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
the navigation menu. So this one uses a while function. So I thought we would look at how that works. So when you open up this particular navigation, the list navigation, and you start typing, so I'll type in CAL, and then you'll notice that it jumped down to calendar, TAS, jumped to tasks, invoice, jumped to invoices, exit, or it's jumping to expenses, exit, EXI, it jumps down to exit. And so, which is pretty cool that it can do that. So how does it do that? And it's using a while function to figure out where to go. Let's go ahead and take a look. So we'll jump in here and I'll type in, type a letter. So we've got a trigger that's on layout keystroke. And what we're doing here is using a custom function called left list. So what this is doing is taking a list of all of our, and let's go ahead and look at this in the data viewer, go to current. And so we're getting our, let's look at the details on here. So the key that was typed is the letter A. And then we're getting a list here, left list, is a list of all of the values, the first letter values of all of these fields. So you'll see, so if we go through this, we've got, let's go ahead and open this. We've got home H, estimates E, invoices I, expenses E. And then what it does is it determines the position. It gets the position of in the list of the key that was typed. So here, the key position is number 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I typed an A, and the first A in that list is the 7th position in the list. And then it says go to record, and the number is the position 7. So then it jumps down to number 7 and then highlights the assets. And then that is, I think that, then it halts. So then it ends, so it took me down to assets and let me, and just stay there. So if I type in E, it jumps to estimates. EX jumps to expenses. Now, if we try that again, so script debugger, E, let's try this again, E, how do I slow this down? E, and then X. Oh, it's tracking them. Let me turn off the so it's only doing this if you type fast enough, which I'm having a hard time typing fast enough. Actually, it's probably impossible to type fast enough. So I'll disable that. So here it doesn't have any letters. I'm going to type in EXI, and you'll notice I'll type a T. It checks. Now here's our keys, exit, and now it gets the list. Here's our list, and you'll notice it's because I typed in 4 letters, it's just grabbing the first 4 letters of each item, and then finding the position and then jumping down to it. So how does this work? Let's go look at that custom function. So I use a custom function that is called left list. So here's my initial variables. Yes. You have a question?
Oh, nope, sorry. I actually
Okay.
unmuted myself when Richard was walking by.
Okay, so we have a counter. We have our list of values, which is the one that we, oops, cancel. I don't want to change anything here. Our list of values, which is from the list, the length, the number of characters that we want to grab, and then the value count. This is going to be our limit, which is and we could call this one limit, but I'm just calling it value count, which is the number of values in the list, and then a result, which we just have is empty. Here's our condition. The counter has to be less than the value count, or the total number of records, or the total number of values in that list that we give it. We count through this one at a time. And then here we're saying left, get value. And then so we're looking at one line at a time. Each iteration is one line in that list. And the length is how many letters we've typed. So if it was 4 letters, it's the length of 4. And then we list that in the result to determine the first 4 characters in that list. And then we give our result. And so this is this is an example of a while that performs an action that helps with the user interface and interacting with navigation. We went through that real fast. Do we have any questions about it?
I don't see any explicit questions at the moment, so I think we're good.
Okay. Yeah, so this is available in the what is it called? In the Wolfpack.
Wolfpack? Yeah, it's part of the
downloads.
Wolfpack add-ons.
And
So
you can grab those add-ons and dig into it if you wanted to. It's not necessarily this is just one of the instances that I've used it. This is kind of an edge case. We wouldn't use it all the time. If you use while and have done some cool generic or general uses, have some general usages for it, I'd love to see what you've come up with, and you can share those with us and see other ways it's been used.
oh yeah, it is too. I just realized it was time, technically. So thank you, Calvin. I think this has been a really awesome explanation and introduction to while. If I have any other questions, I don't see any floating around, so I think we're good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Calvin, very much. Have a good one, everybody. Goodbye.
Got a report of an individual up here who may be a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir!